Can you speak up on the history of the DPRK after the war? Right. Well, the northern half of the Korean Peninsula was liberated by Soviet troops. The southern half of the Korean Peninsula, was, the United States and their allies and former Japanese collaborators set up. There was supposed to be elections for the entire peninsula where every political party was able to participate. And that was the idea. But then the United States, with the Marshall Plan and Syngman Rhee, they declared that that wasn't going to happen. Syngman Rhee became the military dictator of South Korea. And then the people on Jeju Island, which was a stronghold of communist sympathy, started protesting, demanding elections, free elections, and they were massacred. There was a brutal massacre at Jeju Island. And so in response to that, the North said, all right, our country folk are being massacred. We're going to have to intervene. And that is when North Korea, and actually people debate who fired the first shot. It may have been that North Korea was attacked first. So I'm not even saying that they fired the first shot, but there was a massacre, the Jeju massacre, the Jeju Island massacre. They slaughtered thousands of people because they were protesting for democratic rights. There was an uprising on Jeju Island, April 3rd, 1948. Now, here I'll drop it. The Jeju uprising, where these people, they were protesting to demand that they have an election and they get to vote for the Workers' Party, for the Communist Party, right? Because they wanted the right to have an election where every party would participate. And in response to that, there was a brutal, brutal massacre. It was horrendous what was done. What was done, and the U.S. government was involved. There was heavy U.S. involvement in the massacre at Jeju Island, where thousands of people were killed. The USA occupied Jeju Island during the war. There were horrendous atrocities committed by U.S. soldiers on the Korean Peninsula. Horrendous atrocities. And it was in response to that North Korea felt like, okay, half of our country is occupied. We were fighting Japan for decades. Japan has been occupying the country, right? Japan just lost the war. And now the people who collaborated with Japan are still in control of the southern half, first of all. And second of all, now they're killing the people in the southern part of the Korean Peninsula who agree with us. We got to move in and reunify our country, right? And it's like, the narrative, when people talk about North Korea, and this is the sad thing, when they talk about the Korean War in the United States, this is what they tell you. I kid you not. The North invaded the South, as if North Korea and South Korea have always, eternally been separate countries. Oh, well, the North Korea, the Korean War happened because the North invaded the South. That would be like saying that, the U.S. Civil War happened because Abraham Lincoln invaded the South. There was one country, and there were two governments in that country, and one of the governments in that country started killing all the people who agreed with the other government. So at that point, they tried to reunify. It's like, oh, well, North Korea invaded South Korea. There was no North Korea and South Korea back then. There was one Korea that had been occupied by Japan. Japan had been brutalizing and torturing people and using women as sex slaves and doing awful things. Japan lost the war, and the Korean people were finally excited that they would get to have their own government. And then they formed their own government in the northern part of the country. And then the southern part of the country, all the people that had been Japan's puppets were back in power, except the USA was now their boss. And then the people that said, hey, I thought we were going to get to have a free election, all got killed. And at that point, North Korea said, the northern folks said, all right, we're going to go in and try to rescue the southern folks. And that's what happened, right? And it was awful. And every single building above 1 story high was bombed. They bombed the dikes and flooded areas. And the U.S. Air Force people were complaining. They're like, there's nothing left for us to bomb. They would go on bombing raids. They couldn't find any buildings because they bombed so much. There were places where, there were children hiding in basements. And the U.S. soldiers would take big canisters of gasoline and dump them into the basement, and just pour the gasoline into the basement and light it on fire and burn these children alive in basements. You know what I mean? That was a thing that happened. I mean, there's a documentary called The Unknown War that was made about the Korean War. And they showed it on BBC, and they refused to show it on American television because they said American audiences couldn't handle it, right? But go and read Bruce Cummings. Bruce Cummings, the great Korea scholar, probably the top scholar of Korean history in America. Dr. Bruce Cummings speaks Korean fluently, visits both North and South Korea frequently, and he, he very much has shown the horrors of that war. People have no idea how horrendous the Korean War was. And it was 4 million people in North Korea were killed in a country that's like 20 million people, right? Do the math. That's like a very big percentage of the population.